I want to tell you about songwriting. This lecture intends to be part why-to, part how-to, part personal journey, part theoretical, can mastery of one art form lead to proficiency in another, and part practical, how to claim your authority, how to grow, how to endure, how to live joyfully, plus I'll teach you how to write a song. Songwriting may indeed be the most ancient of the literary forms. Did you know that Homer probably sang the Iliad and the Odyssey to his audiences? Here's what that might have sounded like. Greek poets were bards whose stories came to life only in the telling, and it was easier to remember the words if a tune was added. From the pre-literate era to this very day, in non-industrialized areas of Central Asia, there are traditions of weavers singing while weaving, and these songs guide the patterns they weave. Songs have always been crucial to any kind of group work where unity is demanded. Would-be sailors needed to prove that they could sing in order to be hired for merchant ship work in the 19th century. Sea shanties organized the labor, kept the rhythm, passed the time, and brought the sailors into their bodies. People who were captured and dislocated from Africa, brought to the Americas where they were enslaved, people who came with no possessions at all, were able to keep a piece of their home culture alive through singing and music. My grandmother, while ill with Alzheimer's disease, forgot everything about her present-day life and even lost the ability to speak, but she could still sing the words to her favorite childhood song. Storytelling began as a performance art, meaning it could only be consumed in real time. But by the middle of the last millennium, with Gutenberg's printing press allowing broad access to the written word, stories became set, concretized. The telling no longer varied from bard to bard. Instead, readers could point to an edition of a book, and outside of translation, agree on the words, if not the meaning. Songs, though, continued to exist as relics of a purely oral tradition. It wasn't until Edison's cylinder that performances too could be captured, concretized. Fast forward to the second half of the 20th century, when future Nobel Prize winner, writer, musician Bob Dylan decided to try his finger-picking, piano key-thumping hand at poetry. Never a gigantic fan of the studio, Dylan's recordings are often sneered at by music aficionados. He recorded quickly, neglected things like tuning the instruments. If he didn't get the song right, he didn't worry too much. He just hit the road and refined the songs on stage, sometimes performing them with completely different chord progressions or tunes. If he felt like changing a word, adding a verse, that's what he did. Over the years, Dylan fans have collected myriad versions from his sprawling catalog. The original recording of Blowing in the Wind is track number 1 on Dylan's 1962 release, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. That version, while still a temporal art form as opposed to static or spatial, will never change. The way 20-year-old Dylan sang that track is immortalized for as long as humans have access to electricity. A time capsule. Even if electricity stops working, though the recording might be lost forever, the song itself might well endure. The song is a wonderfully portable art form. When one has written a song, it goes with the listener wherever she goes, in the form of a whistle or a hum. A phrase of lyric heard out of context can bring to memory the entire experience of that era, and usually in just under 5 minutes. If Homer could survive for centuries before being codified, why not Dylan? The evolving versions of Blowin' in the Wind might change dramatically, but something of the essence will surely endure, passed along around campfires or by kids in the back of school buses. But books, like people, die. They die in fires or floods or in the mouths of worms or at the whims of tyrants. If they are not safeguarded, they go out of the world. And when a book goes out of the world, the memory dies, a second death. That's a quotation from one of my favorite novels of 2021, Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, which can be read as an homage to the unique technology of books, to libraries, to the careful stewardship of the written word. Many times within the novel, a character must choose to preserve a text. Doing so is a labor of love and respect for those upon whose shoulders we stand, as well as a gift to future generations. But as I read the book, I was conscious of one of the central questions Doerr seems to be asking. What of a future devoid of the fossil fuels that currently preserve our electronic libraries, our digital libraries, the lost text that threads the book, Cloud Cuckoo Land, a fictional play by a real Greek playwright, Diogenes, is passed down orally to young Constance, a bedtime story told to her by her father. The songwriter in me felt a glimmer of hope. Songs come with their own foolproof time capsule technology. If they are beloved enough, they get sung, and via oral tradition handed down from one generation to the next, changing as they go. Given the mutability of the song form, it's no wonder that I came to writing fiction somewhat blind to its challenges. But first, a digression. By the age of 7, I distinctly remember understanding there was nothing in the world more magical, more rewarding, and more difficult than being able to write songs. Magical because it seemed impossible to conjure an original melody out of nowhere. Difficult because how could you write anything original when there are only 12 tones in a scale? Being able to write a unique melody and write lyrics that mesmerized, told a story, transported the listener into imaginary lands was tantamount to flying. But that's what makes it rewarding. Who wouldn't want to fly? I announced my career choice to my parents, and though I labored for years, it took me until the ripe age of 13 to successfully write a song. It wasn't a good song, but it held water. The melody had integrity, though the lyrics were sort of low-budget Dylan. Still, I was pleased and immediately played it for everyone I knew. Within my very limited circle of friends and family, it was a hit. By that point, I knew I was a writer-artist type, which was a relief because it explained away my weirdness, or some of it. Though the desire to be a songwriter waxed and waned during my teen years, I must have suspected that that's what I was because, to my surprise, I ended up all but double majoring in English and music in college. Midway through, I started writing songs again in earnest, and after 2 post-college years proving to myself that I would never be cut out for a day job, I launched my band, The Neilds, with my sister Katrina and my then-husband David. We worked hard at our art, craft, and entrepreneurial skills, had a lot of luck, and ended up with an extremely satisfying career. We timed it well. If we'd come along even a year later, I'm sure Napster and the subsequent destruction of artists' ability to garner income from album sales would have discouraged us and made it unfeasible to tour in time to generate enough fans to support us into our dotage. Today, my sister and I make a decent middle-class income through a crazy patchwork quilt of creative jobs, all of which depend on our one-time success. Each experience I had as a writer, performer, musician, member of an indie band led me to the next step. Just as in writing a story, each sentence brings us to the one that follows it, or each line in a poem or song points us in the direction of what the whole piece wants to be. One day in 1997, while recording at the A&M studio in Hollywood, it occurred to me that it would be fun to write a novel about a band like ours. Write what you know, I'd always heard, though as a songwriter I tended to do the opposite. But I began spinning some characters in my head, and pretty soon the characters started writing songs of their own. What if, I thought, we release a CD of this fictional band along with the hardcover? Fast forward 4 years, my sister was pregnant, and we needed to get off the road for a few months. Moreover, my marriage had ended, and I was re-examining my entire life. In the winter of 2001, I went on a 2-woman tour with my friend, the writer Pam Houston. This was her brainchild. She thought it would be fun if we created a show where she would read a passage from her stories or memoir, and I would respond with a song of which her work reminded me. Then she would respond with a piece that reminded her of my song. That tour was like a 2-week crash MFA. I shared my pages with Pam, who critiqued them, but more importantly, I got to hear her read night after night. I got to live with a working writer, see firsthand what her process was like. Before one of our shows, when she and I were deciding which pieces and songs to read and sing, I remember her saying, "You know, Nerissa, the real joy in writing is the act of creation. It's getting the image right, getting the sentence right. Publication and accolades are nothing compared to that." The following year, out of the blue, the acquisitions editor of Scholastic Books called my manager and asked if I wanted to write a YA novel. Thus began my second career as a writer. This would be easy, I thought. Though in college I'd studied almost exclusively poetry and plays, I was a lifelong reader of novels. My band included 4 other English majors, and when on tour, we'd inevitably home in on the independent bookstore in whatever town we were driving through, spending our per diems on Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Jennifer Egan, John Krakauer, Margaret Atwood. Below my bench seat in the van, I organized my books as if they were on a horizontal shelf. I called those years grad school, because all day long as we drove from Lubbock, Texas to Santa Fe, or whatever, I'd be reading and writing in the first bench seat of the 15-passenger van. Other songwriters I knew were publishing books: Bill Morrissey, Jewel, Patti Smith, James McBride, so why not me? Music is a world within itself, with a language we all understand. Okay, here's what it took me years to understand. That thing I thought was so hard when I was 7, writing tunes, melodies, finding variety in the 12 tones, that turned out to be the easy part. Once I mastered the music, it actually made my job as lyricist infinitely easier. I'll show you what I mean. All right, so this is the song that was already on our record, If You Lived Here, You'd Be Home Now, that Scholastic wanted me to write a young adult book about. Angela, this town is row. Angela, this town is row. Now, without the tune, Angela, this town is wrong is, well, I wouldn't put that in a poem or a line of prose even necessarily. It's kind of weird. But when you add the tune, and then beyond the tune, add the chordal treatment, the emotion is immediately clear to the listener. Angela's town is rough. Music is a cheat. All by itself, it can clarify emotion. No words required. In the same way a film can show the reader exactly what the writer was trying to convey. Every picture tells a story, baby. What I came to learn after years of trying to write my novel about the folk rock band, The Big Idea, is that writing prose, for me, is infinitely more difficult than writing songs. That's why I came to grad school. I've been working on that Big Idea novel off and on for over 20 years, writing more versions and drafts than I can count. Omniscient point of view, close third narration from 6 different characters, first person, narrating from just 2 characters, etc., etc. Some drafts are over 800 pages long, some under 300. Someone suggested I try it all in blank verse. Thanks. Someone else said to make it a 3-minute song. Double thanks. I keep thinking I'm done, and then someone points out one little structural thing, and I rip the draft up and start again from scratch. Part of me enjoys this, thinking, this is just me being Dylan, revising on my feet, singing a different version of the same song night after night. Indeed, many other songwriters have no one definitive version of a particular song. Consider the 3 versions of Heart's Dreamboat Annie. this morning into the sun. Heading out this morning into the sun. Heading out this morning. Maybe I think too much. Maybe I think too much. Oh, maybe I think too much. Maybe I think too much. Maybe I think too much. Not only that, we're in this new era where within the same week, Taylor Swift bought back her catalog so that she could re-record her album Red, and Kiese Lehman bought back his first two books so that he could rewrite them. In short, I still have a lot to learn. I've not written the book I dreamed of. It's not the book I planned to write back in 1997, a multimedia, part Dave Eggers, part Nora Ephron commercial blockbuster. Part of me wants desperately to achieve that finished, perfect book. That book I would give away because I'm so damned proud of finally saying exactly what I wanted to say in the exact right way. That book I'd want someone to discover in a library 1,000 years from now. I can write a good song in a week or a month at most. So, if some of my songs don't make it to the light of publication, that's okay. I have plenty of others. I don't yet feel this way about novels, and given the time it takes to write one, I'm not sure I ever will. The stakes seem much higher in terms of achieving that concrete technology a book demands. No one is going to memorize my novel and pass it down orally. The novels I love to read contain characters I can see, understand, fall in love with. How do these writers achieve this? In songwriting, that was always easy for me to do. I could sketch out a character in 14 lines and my listeners would tell me they felt I'd had a hidden camera trained on their relationship. So I spent the day or that they could see the character. Reading Daddy's text from to see if it would be born on Christmas Day. That they worried about the character. It didn't hurt that my sister Katrina, our lead singer, is a gifted stage actor who breathes life into all my creations. On the other hand, it took me 15 years to render Peter Beckett, the troubled eldest child / lead guitarist in the Beckett family, to my own satisfaction. How could I get better at this? With words alone, how could I achieve what Jess Walters does in The Cold Millions, or Elizabeth Strout does in Olive Kitteridge? What are we here for at VCFA if not to discover our own authority? Yes, we're here to learn from our beloved faculty mentors and to leave knowing who we are and what we know we need to say to the world. But we get our authority in part at least from a mastery of craft. Once craft is mastered, we come to believe in our own voices, our own wisdom, our own instincts, our own purpose, so powerfully that we lose our fear of what others think. Authority comes from a higher power, though it's you and only you who channel the particular message you've been given. You become clear that whatever seems to be coming from your mouth or your pen or your guitar will be helpful to someone else. You are fully confident in both purpose and message. One of my favorite quotations is by dancer, choreographer Martha Graham, who writes, "There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique, and if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost." After 4 semesters here, I still maintain that writing fiction is harder than writing songs. That said, there were many writing parallels my amazing VCFA faculty mentors, as well as my peers, taught me that connected with lessons I learned from my years as a songwriter. While I might not ever be a master in fiction, and what a stupid word, they really should change the name of the degree we get, my fiction has improved, and I can say that on most days, I love it. My writing has become a very dear friend to me. Like Ann Patchett, I've come to think of it as an imaginary friend that I drink tea with in the afternoon. At the same time, I was able to connect many of the lessons I learned as a songwriter to the art and craft and nervous system I am learning to cultivate as a fiction writer. When my band started out, my sister and I were fresh out of college. We had lots of friends and family living in key markets: New York, Boston, DC, Chicago, the Bay Area. Whenever we got a gig, we'd send out postcards to everyone in that area, begging them to come. At first, our friends would come see us, enthusiastically bringing their friends along. How cool to take your new office mates to a bar to see a band you actually knew. The club was delighted with us for bringing in a crowd, greening up their cash registers, but after a few months, our friends stopped coming. Why? They'd already seen us. They'd helped us out, but it's not like they were going to drop $50 every time our ragged little act came to some noisy bar. Nevertheless, we were resentful once we realized that these friends weren't just dying to find out what we would write next, say next, sing next. They were not fans. One day, around 2 years into our career, we had a free show at a Borders bookstore somewhere in Connecticut within a half hour from where we lived. We figured we'd be background music to the folks browsing for Nabokov and the new diet and fitness book, or having a cup of floral tea in the bookstore cafe. But to our shock, the manager told us they'd been getting calls all day and had to remove shelving to accommodate the expected crowds. And it was a crowd. Into the big box store poured hundreds of people, many of whom were familiar looking, but few whose names we knew. These, we realized with a sudden clarity, were our fans. These people who'd been sitting in tiny coffee shops and bars and folk joints all over New England were here in such large numbers because this was a free show, and we were, they told us, their favorite band. I realized I'd been getting it all wrong. It was never the job of my family and friends to like our music or come to our shows. They weren't our listeners. After that, my songwriting became much more focused. Instead of casting about for the right song, the right hook, the right identity or genre, or wondering what I could possibly write in my pathetic postcard to get my family and friends to come back to a show, I began writing to this audience that I experienced in person, the ones whose faces I saw at the show. As I wrote, I pictured their faces. I began to know their names. I had a back and forth with them. I wrote for them, I wrote to them. This helps to remind me that, as opposed to the slush piles in the offices of agents and publishers, people want to like your work. When I pick up a book in a bookstore, I'm hoping to see something in that first paragraph that convinces me to buy it. People who took the trouble to come out and see our shows are hoping they'll be pleased. They're rooting for us. I wish I could tell all my writer friends how profoundly their lives will change once they find their audience, their readership, their writing community of readers. I have found such a community among my VCFA peers. One of the most important lessons I learned in my career as a musician is that the size of the audience bears no relation on the quality of my satisfaction when the song I made or the book I wrote is received with gratitude. Similarly, I've learned that to have even a few readers engage with my fiction can give me a sense of direction and purpose that I never get laboring away by myself. When even one reader engages with me around my novel or a passage I've shared, I feel deeply seen and understood. I feel satisfied for days. Hey Jude, don't make it. Sometimes we writers get specific ideas. Gogol got the idea for Dead Souls from hearing a story about a landowner buying other people's dead serfs so that he could be allowed to brew and sell vodka. Paul McCartney decided to write a song for his friend John Lennon's broken-hearted son Julian after his parents got divorced. The result, Hey Jude, is pretty much that idea realized. And Sometimes we wander in the wilderness, just following our curiosity until the object of our obsession tells us what it wants to be. Jennifer Egan became fascinated with the deep sea divers of the early 1940s who worked in the Navy shipyards in Brooklyn. Eventually, the story grew from her years of research and became Manhattan Beach. Joni Mitchell purposely changes the tunings of her guitar precisely so that she can wander in the wilderness. She has no idea what the names of the chords her fingers are finding are. For her, the process is all about creating order out of chaos. Sometimes the initial inspiration becomes a side note. Anne Patchett wanted to write a novel about a woman who left her family to become a nun, but as she wrote The Dutch House, it became clear to her that what she was really interested in was the children. My sister Katrina often gives me the idea for the song. If the idea lights me up, I usually write the song she wants me to write. After the 2016 election, I and everyone I knew was almost dangerously depressed and hopeless. The two ideas that kept me going in those dark days were Gandhi's saying, "Throughout history, tyrants always fall, always think on it." It was Katrina's idea to take those two thoughts, those two hopeful thoughts, and braid them together so that one of our voices would be saying, "Tyrants always fall," and the other voice would be saying, "There are more of us than there are of them." But sometimes as I'm writing the song, it rebels. I started to write a song about alcoholism and infidelity, and the song said, "Are you even listening to me? I'm not cynical, dude. I'm sincere. Don't boss me around. Let me show you who I am." The song in question, Easy People, went on to become perhaps our greatest hit. Read your poetry and prose out loud. You'll find out immediately if it works or not. I make a practice of reading my work out loud to all of my writing groups, and I ask my students to do the same. They can tell immediately what works and what doesn't, which saves a lot of time. I've recorded myself reading the big idea twice now, and it's incredibly useful, especially in terms of tidying up strange phrasings or unnatural dialogue, plus passages that bore me as I'm reading them. No one wants boring. If we're doing it right, there will be music to our sentences, and most folks do have an ear for it. If you don't feel confident about yours, try listening to audiobooks with highly rated narrators. When I sit down to write a song, I'll know a few things pretty quickly about the structure. If it's blues-based, it's going to fit into the form of the blues, a form as strict and versatile as a sonnet. If it's a more traditional folk song, it might attempt to tell a linear story, and it probably won't have a chorus. I'll know if it's an uptempo or a ballad. The music tells you pretty quickly how complex it wants to be. Songs like villanelle or haiku have an intrinsic form to help the writer navigate the process of composing. Similarly, novels and stories begin to show us their form as we bushwhack into the unknown territory, just as a mountain begins to reveal its secrets as we head up. I never wrote words separately from music until I already had the music solidly in my head. For me, the words need the music to guide them. Sometimes I might write an orphan bit of music and then later write a whole orphan bit of lyric, or get an idea that I want to stick onto this idea, onto this musical thing. And very occasionally, I have been successful at cramming them together, but usually not. In Let the Great World Spin, Jennifer Egan in A Visit from the Goon Squad, and George Saunders and Lincoln in the Bardo all managed to create vastly different voices and styles when switching from chapter to chapter. Okay, have I convinced you yet that you want to write a song, that you should write a song, that you can write a song? For reasons I explained earlier, it might outlast the written word. Not to mention, it's completely cool for rock stars to cover their gray hair with shoe polish. How many authors can get away with that? It's easy to write a bad song, just like it's easy to write a bad story or poem or essay, but just as with fiction, you can't write good songs if you don't write a bunch of bad ones first. So I'm going to give you some exercises, all on my handy PDF, for you to do on your own time. Now, you might be saying, I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. To that I say, excuses, excuses. Do you think Lou Reed can sing? Standing on the corner, suitcase in my hand. Leonard Cohen is considered one of the greatest songwriters of all time, but listen to him sing his own version of Hallelujah. But you don't really care for music, do you? I want to say one thing about rhyming. Like modern poetry, the modern pop song doesn't have to rhyme. Still, most do. In truth, I love rhymes. Rhymes give music to the lyrics even when there's no melody. Of course, rap and hip-hop artists all know this.
Where France is queen and kingless, who signed a treaty with a king whose head is now in a basket. Would you like to take it out and ask it? Or should we honor our treaty, King Louis's head? Do whatever you want, I'm super dead.
For me, the act of finding a rhyme for a word can be a helpful generative piece of the process. Sometimes I'll use a rhyming dictionary to see what my choices are, and sometimes an unexpected word gives me an entirely different direction to take the song. My dad's an excellent singer and guitar player, and he often wrote new words to familiar songs, playing them for friends and family in honoring important events. If you don't want to write a tune but want to try your hand at songwriting, try this. Choose a familiar song, note its meter, is it 3/4 time, 4/4 time, and write your own lyrics. For our most recent album, November, I wrote new verses for Catherine Lee Bates' America the Beautiful.
For a reason led the founding of our rules, the balance of the power trumps the tyranny of fools. America, our liberty has blinded us with greed. Our bounty has deluded us to take more than we need.
Young composers were taught to copy Bach compositions note for note to understand how a great composer thinks. Try this. Copy a song you admire note for note, word for word. Learn the songs of others and analyze them. This is something Brett Lott teaches. Copy a great story, word for word. In doing so, you are mimicking the brain-to-hand relationship of a genius. Abby Frucht also has a version of this exercise. She told me to copy the sentence structure of a scene of heightened tension between the narrator and her husband in Lionel Shriver's The Post-Birthday World. Imitate the rhythms and grammatical structures of a sentence, the way the action rises and falls, but don't imitate the plot. Copy a theme from a novel you like. I took Margaret Atwood's Cat's Eye, about a straight woman still obsessed with her best friend from childhood, as my source for Gotta Get Over Greta. Countless songwriters have taken the basic idea of Scarborough Fair to make their own updated version. Paul Simon's is the most famous, but Dylan's Girl from the North Country is essentially the same song. As is the more recent, If You See Her, Say Hello. Here's mine.
If you're going to Abington Seafair, where the river flows slowly and so does the tide, remember me to one who will be there. He once was a true love of mine.
Now that you have your idea, it's time to go into that trance state Robert Olin Butler talks about in From Where You Dream. My faculty advisor, Nance Van Winkle, told me to read this book, and it's one of my favorite writing books of all time. Suddenly an image comes, and another, and boy, then you're gone. And that's how you write. You're dreamstorming, inviting the images as moment-to-moment experience through your unconscious. That's the place from which you must write. This Butler trance is what I've always done instinctively when writing songs. It helps to have my guitar in my lap, like this, and my hands occupied in the act of strumming or picking, whatever the chord pattern is, and I rock back and forth, and I loosen up my body, and I sing without thinking. In the same way, I learned how to write prose from this place of non-censorship, this dream space. I've had to pause at the keyboard, the computer keyboard, stare into space or close my eyes and watch with my inner eye the scene between the characters and wait for it to unfold. In the same way, I have to wait for the music to come as I'm writing a song. I watch the scene as if I'm actually in the cinema, and I trust what I see. Trust the weird thought. Trust this thing that initially doesn't make any sense. Give yourself time to let the ideas marinate. This is what Sarah McLachlan says. Look for phrases, both musical and lyrical, that come to you sui generis as you are driving, showering, dreaming. Go around like a camcorder, as Anne Lamott advises. Everything you experience is grist for the mill. Pull it all up from that deep river mud of your unconscious, and as Robert Olin Butler says, go into that dreamstorming state frequently. So, my friend Liz Patel, whom you know, was in one of my writing groups several years back, and she was reading from her marvelous novel, and I misheard her. I thought she said, in a world all full of Normandies. Okay, that's not what she said. I interrupted her as she was reading and said, wait, Liz, did you just say in a world all full of Normandies? And she said, no. All right, good. I'm stealing that line. And I wrote it down, and I tried to write a song, and it didn't work. But a year later, I found that little bit, and I remembered that how I was intrigued by that line. And so I wrote a full song.
In a world full of Normandies.
Jeff Tweedy has a wonderful exercise from his recent book, How to Write One Song. In it, you make a list on one side of a piece of paper consisting of nouns and a second list consisting of verbs. I took the nouns from a book I randomly pulled off the shelf, Nathaniel Philbrick's Mayflower. Shipping words. Then, having the idea that I wanted to write a song called When I Was a DJ, I picked verbs and gerunds from the world of a DJ. Here's what it looked like. And now I'll sing you a little bit of it.
When I was a DJ, mixing fire, mixing salt into the wounds of your desire. When I was a DJ, I sang the whales to sleep. I always tried to give you something you could never keep. When I was a DJ, I'll tell you something you may know. I engineered that volcano. I made it out alive. But if you listen closely, you will see that I am mostly just a sequence man, someone who never banned the language of the land.
As some of my wonderful teachers and fellow students have pointed out in their lectures, when we dabble in a related art form, we inevitably come back to our writing with a fresh perspective. Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, and of course Patti Smith are all accomplished visual artists. Colin Malloy from The Decemberists is a fine novelist, and National Book Award winner James McBride is a killer saxophonist. What I haven't said is how important our work is. Why? Because books and music saved me when I was a young person. Music especially was everything to me. I'm not talking about my ambitions or my creations of music. I'm talking about the gratitude I feel for the work of the Beatles, Pete Seeger, Odetta, Robert Johnson, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Dolly Parton, Earth, Wind and Fire, and on and on and on. As a teenager, I lived in my bedroom, a record on my turntable all the time, ingesting this art form. When I wasn't listening, I was reading Shel Silverstein, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Louisa May Alcott, later F. Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, James Joyce, Ann Tyler, Barbara Kingsolver, Michael Cunningham, Leo Tolstoy, Jonathan Franzen, Zadie Smith, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and on and on. Heaven to me is immersion in song or story, in these beautiful, fragile art forms that come through our minds and fingers and breath and tenacity. If I never wrote a song, if I never write another, if I never publish my novels, I will always have the joy of loving what I love. The privilege of getting to listen to and even sing those songs I love that are written by other people. I will always have the joy of getting lost in someone else's novel. It's a privilege and a gift to love books, to love music, to be an audience member, a member of a readership. Perhaps the biggest gift of my whole VCFA education, now that I'm on the other side of it, is that I've re-engaged my inner fan. If I never write another word again, studying fiction as I've done, reading over 100 novels in the past 2 years, has opened doors, created a new world for me to inhabit. I've always been a reader, but now I crave books. In the same way that I came to see myself as a small but legitimate player on the broad musical stage, I now see myself as a part of this larger literary and human conversation, no matter how slight the contribution of my little voice. The same goes for you. So go now, back to your own hearth, and make something for a young person,
for your beloved aunt, for your best friend, for a stranger you'll never meet. Thank you for listening.
We do.